You're not addicted to food, or so you think, but you may be addicted to an economy that needs you to be addicted. Every snack food, drive-through, energy drink that's sold to us isn't just selling us a bite or a taste. They're really selling control. So today we're going to expose how food addiction doesn't only harm our health, but it really has reshaped our economy, our productivity, and even our purpose. So let's connect the dots between what's on our plate and the state of our nation. In prior videos, I have talked about the addictive food business model. In the 1980s, two tobacco giants, R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris, bought major food corporations. They didn't bring recipes, they brought formulas. This addictive food business model was intended to hook us young and have a customer for life. By making formulas addictive, advertised heavily, making it affordable and accessible, they engineered these foods to hit the dopamine receptors just like nicotine. And then these snack foods started appearing everywhere, like gas stations, convenience stores, schools, and vending machines, knowing that if they hooked a customer young, the longer the revenue stream. I used to think that overeating was a lack of willpower, at least for me, until I realized that this was all by design. And I've went on to help thousands of people with processed food addiction, and that's what led to my Freedom Kitchen classes. Because when our brains are stuck in this dopamine loop, we live in survival mode in the limbic brain. Then you don't have access to your executive function. It's more reactive instead of creative. It makes us anxious, not necessarily analytical. And as an engineer or a systems consultant by trade, I'm a highly analytical person. But what I found was processed foods interrupted my ability to critically think. You know, I supported assembly lines for General Motors for many years. And the same concept of an assembly line is now how I see most of our society has been constructed. The same principles are used on people. And so we need to make people predictable and we need to make them compliant. Well, you may know that the school system in America created by Ford was created to mold future generations to be good workers. Well, to be honest, I see this with the food as well, because addicted consumers become compliant consumers, and predictable behavior equals predictable profit. And when we're addicted, we lose our ability to critically think. And as compliant consumers stuck in our addictive loop, we fail to ask the big questions like, why is our medical debt topping $1 trillion a year? Or why is healthcare the nation's largest industry, nearly 20% of our GDP? You know why? Because every craving is keeping us stuck in this addictive loop, and it's a distraction. We were told that convenience would save time, but it steals our creativity, our cognition, and even our cash. A culture of convenience cannot be a culture of creativity. When dinner comes out of a box, imagination dies in the process. And the cost doesn't stop just at the checkout line, because cheap food leads to expensive healthcare. If addiction drives dependence, then what restores independence? Let's zoom out 40 years. The great trade-off. In 1980, America had about 19 million manufacturing jobs. Today, roughly 12 million. That's 7 million hands that once built things in this country. Trade deals like NAFTA and offshoring promised cheap goods and greater wealth. Instead, they delivered cheap goods and fragile communities. At the same time, the food industry outsourced our kitchens. Microwaves replaced stoves, drive-thrus replaced dining room tables, and we became a service-based economy, really a servant economy. So machines might have gotten faster, but humans got slower. Productivity might have increased on paper for the corporations, but real wages for Americans flatlined. And this was all predicted in the book, The World is Flat. Dr. Robert Lustig calls this the dumbing down of America. Processed foods inflame the body and blunt the brain, especially the prefrontal cortex, the seat of focus, discipline, and critical thinking. When our brains run on corn syrup instead of ketones, we stop creating and we start consuming. Health became a commodity. Healthcare spending has exploded to nearly 20% of our GDP, the largest industry in the world's largest economy. Wow. That means our nation's growth depends on sickness. We don't export goods anymore. We export disease management. The gluttony of rich foods isn't luxury, it's a distraction. While we're feeding our cravings, we stopped feeding our economy. We keep saying we're the busiest generation in history, yet we produce almost nothing tangible. We answer emails, we attend meetings about meetings, we optimize workflows, but how much of that creates real value? Something you can hold, eat, or hand down to the next generation. Over the last 40 years, we've substituted making with managing. Factories became fulfillment centers. Hands-on skills were traded for looking at screens. And when we outsourced production, we outsourced our pride. Farming, in 1950, nearly 15% of Americans farmed. Today, it's less than 2%. We import close to 80% of our seafood, a growing share of our produce, and even our beef is being imported. The average farmer is over 60 years old, and many of them are retiring, and their families are not taking over the farm. Fewer than 2% of food system workers are under 25. And we used to make things like power tools here in the US. Tools, appliances, electronics, the backbone of self-reliance. And those are now built in China, Vietnam, and Mexico. US tool manufacturing has dropped by more than 40% since just the year 2000. And Detroit, where I live, doesn't make all the cars anymore. We assemble global parts, but major plants now sit south of the border, where labor is cheaper. And technology, where I spent my career. Even our innovation economy depends on imported chips, mined minerals, and assembly abroad. So what do we export? I don't know what we export anymore. I heard soybeans. We export debt through global finance. We export data through social platforms, and maybe we're exporting our dopamine addiction for fast food, streaming, and instant gratification. Everywhere that our Western culture touches. I'm not sure that's something to be proud of. When a nation no longer produces, it begins to consume itself. We are busy maintaining the illusion of productivity, scrolling, reacting, ordering, tracking, while our soil erodes and our skills disappear. Dr. Robert Lustig calls it reward hijacking. We traded satisfaction for stimulation. The more convenience we gain, the less competence we keep. And that mental shift from producer to consumer is exactly what makes food addiction so profitable. A distracted, depleted population doesn't invent anything. They order in. It doesn't fix anything. It just replaces things. It doesn't plant anything. It doesn't grow anything. So what is the real economic consequence? Our GDP still looks big because it counts healthcare bills, processed food sales, and streaming services as growth. Come on. These are costs, not creations. We're not creating anything. Meanwhile, real wealth, the kind measured in skills and soil and self-reliance, is shrinking every year. And it's not just jobs disappearing. Even the jobs that remain aren't paying what they used to, nor will they. Real pay for most Americans is virtually unchanged in 40 years. While inflation eats away at your paycheck, the promise of productivity gains lifting you up has broken down. We're busier than ever, but our wages are flat. Our buying power is shrinking, and our capacity to build, save, and innovate has become limited. The problem isn't just addiction to food, it's addiction to comfort. Comfort dulls curiosity, and curiosity is what drives creation. When we stop asking, how can I make this myself? We stop innovating altogether. You might think this is a big leap for me to discuss the impact of food addiction on our stagnating economy, but I maintain that a culture of convenience cannot be a culture of creativity. We are stagnating. And as a health coach, I have continued to explore the decline of our health, which goes back to our food. If we learn how to feed ourselves, we can relearn how to build, grow, and lead. Cooking is the first small act of production that most of us still control. It's where sovereignty starts. Cooking is the antidote to dependence. It's how we restore skill, sovereignty, and self-respect. In Freedom Kitchen classes, the kids get to explore freedom and independence and sovereignty by making their own food and understanding where it comes from, learning what they can grow. They learn that real food helps real focus. The same kids who once struggled to concentrate can suddenly think clearly. Cooking teaches critical thinking. It also teaches them curiosity, creativity, courage, and confidence. Every meal made from scratch is a withdrawal from the system that profits from our sickness. Every home-cooked meal is a deposit in our national resilience. If you've ever felt powerless around food or thought you had a lack of willpower, make sure you watch my other videos to know this is by design. In particular, the one on the psychology of powerlessness. Freedom doesn't begin in Congress. It begins in our kitchen. There is a real cost to food addiction and complacency in America, and freedom begins and ends here. Welcome to Freedom Kitchen.